Nicole, and Tracy, and Jose, and Jill Orlov. Hey, Jill. Big waves.
Hi, Jill.
Hi,
and
guys.
Nicole. I like seeing people I know on there.
Yep.
I can't read that fast.
Phyllis. Hi, Phyllis. Tracy Moran. These are some familiar names, friendly faces, or friendly names. Lisa Green. Thank you guys for joining. We have a few minutes. We're waiting for folks to join. And so while we're waiting, give us a heads up where you are zooming in from. State, country, put it in the chat box or the Q&A. No, put it in the chat.
In chat, yeah.
We can see your note, Jill. Hi, Louisville.
Yeah, remind everybody that we can't either see them or hear them.
Right. Okay, so if you're just joining, we don't have the videos or the sound on from you guys. And I'm gonna go through how we're gonna work the little small talk in a bit as folks join. But welcome, welcome. If you're just joining us, where are you calling in from? And also, if you guys wouldn't mind putting in the chat how you learned about this Zoominar. Where did you hear about this? Was it through one of my emails? Was it on Facebook? If you could just put in the chat box how you found out. Hi, Allison in Fremont. And Lynn. Delia is joining us from Chicago. Yay. FBI, I mean, Facebook, FBI.
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 The FBI.
As FBI. Facebook. I get it.
They're on to us.
Hi. Yeah, they're on to us. Hi, Anne. How are you? All right, we're going to wait just 1 minute, and then I'm going to say hello and introduce our wonderful.
Hey, Teresa. Nice to see you.
Yay. All right, so we are live. I just wanted to welcome all of you guys and thank you for joining us today on this special Zoominar. We're doing things a little bit differently this time around. We're having a little bit of a small talk. It's like a small talk symposium. So and then this is an opportunity for us to get together and talk maybe about specific topics that might be relevant to us in this little miniatures world that we love so much. So thank you guys for joining. I'm glad you're here with us on this lovely Sunday from wherever you are zooming in from. Where I'm on the East Coast. It's beautiful here today. So this basically builds off the whole Meet the Miniaturist series, but allows us to take a deeper dive into some of the topics that might interest you or that interest us, and an opportunity to invite folks in like Louise and Thomas, and I'm going to introduce them in a little bit, to get their perspectives and have them tell us what they're thinking. This is an interactive symposium, so we're going to let the guests give their talk, but the chat box is open for comments. It's open for questions, and so I'll be monitoring that box just to hear what you're saying and give the feedback back to our panelists, and to make this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to tell us what you think at any time and listen in on the conversation. Also wanted to let you guys know that if you go through your speaker view, your gallery view, it'll be a more enjoyable experience for you because you'll get to see the three of us at the same time. So that might be a good way for you to sort of to watch this. Let me introduce our panelists today. The first one is Louise Krasniewicz. Yay! Louise, you might be familiar with. She was one of our Meet the Miniaturist a little while back. She's an author, she's an artist, she's an educator. She's gonna dive into the topic of miniatures as a way of creating alternative universes. And what better person to do that than Louise, because she is an author and educator of anthropology. She's a maker, she's a writer, so this should be freaking fabulous. And then we have Thomas Doyle, and Thomas is an artist as well. He is been written up in New York Magazine, The New Yorker, New York Times. He had a one-man show at the Hudson River Museum very recently, and he's going to talk about the topic of miniatures as a way of escaping. Whether you're a maker, whether you're an artist, whether you're an enthusiast. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to end this up with a topic that I chose about the topic of miniatures as a way of this growing pop culture phenomenon that I see it as. And I would love to hear your thoughts when I go through that part. But just seeing the growth of miniatures over the last few years and some of the things I'm seeing and maybe some of the things you're seeing. So with that, we will open the floor to Louise, who's going to talk about her topic. Yay.
Hey, thanks, Darren, and welcome everybody. I'm going to make some dogmatic statements because that's what I do. And you are welcome to interrupt by asking questions in the chat anytime, and Darren will pop in and challenge me. And here's my number one dogmatic statement, and this actually comes from my research as an anthropologist. For all miniatures, any kind of miniatures, whether they're cute little miniatures of food or beautiful dioramas or big doll houses, I have sort of one criteria by which I judge them. And that is based on the idea that we are storytelling animals. Oh wait, there's a book, and it's not my book. It's called, I don't know if it's backwards, The Storytelling Animal. It is backwards. And the idea behind that is everything we do as humans is to try to make sense of the world. And we make sense of the chaos around us, and we all know chaos right now. We make sense of that chaos by putting it into a narrative form. Okay, so that's the background of my theory. In terms of miniatures, I like to look at miniatures as if I'm like a detective. And I'm trying to find clues from whatever I'm looking at, whether it's a diorama or an individual miniature, and find the story that it is evoking. Like the story is not inherent in the miniature. The story comes from you, the viewer. So I'm going to show you a couple things that explain this idea, and you could tell me if you agree or don't agree. So a lot of, oh, I didn't share my screen. I'm just shutting myself off here. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a bunch of wonderful pictures. Okay, so here we go. All right, so the first, can you guys all see a dead body laying in a kitchen?
Yep. Yeah.
So this is an image of a set of miniatures called the Nutshell Studies. Can I hold it up? Yeah, but it's backwards. The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death. And this is a series of dioramas from the 30s and 40s made by a woman to teach forensic science to detectives. And so it's a series. I'll show you where it is. So I went and visited it with a friend at the coroner's office in Maryland. It's a display room. I don't know what it is now because they were revamping it and they took some of it to a museum in Washington. But anyway, you can see there's a whole bunch of dioramas. And my friend and I went and we played detective. That's her. And she's showing, you have to use a flashlight like you were a detective, and you look into the rooms and find the clues. And down below it, there are stories that tell you what some of the clues are, and you have to figure out what crime was committed. So that's where, excuse me, where that comes from. And I modeled one of my exhibits at the Philadelphia Flower Show on this idea. And so this is the Hawaiian Museum from maybe about 6 years ago. And if you look carefully, there's a dead body down in the corner. But there are also clues all over the place. So things that are out of place, just like in a crime scene. So there's glasses there and a purse and something under him, which turns out to be a candy bar, and something being stolen here. So the idea for me in making miniatures is I don't want to just show you cool stuff I can make, or even cute stuff I can make, or amazing stuff I can make. I want you to come up with a story that you see generated by the miniature. So I'm going to show you some more stuff and different ways that I do this. So I do dioramas. And here are some of this is my most well-known one. Many of you have seen this already. So this is Rear Window, also from the Philadelphia Flower Show. But the reason I loved Rear Window is because of the idea that in each window is a story. And I'm giving you the clues to the story. So this is Miss Lonely Hearts' bedroom. And you could see the bottle of pills and the alcohol in the drink and so on, and her beautiful negligee. You know, what's the story? What was it that she was doing here? Same thing with one of the other windows that you can look through. In fact, when Hitchcock made this movie, he presented it as a series of movie screen size windows. You're supposed to look in each window and see a story being played out. So here's the murderer's kitchen with the knife and saw he used to cut up his wife's body. I didn't say any of this was cute, but this stuff is fun. I did a diorama a couple of years ago. I'm very interested in the whole idea of goddesses and why every culture has goddesses, but you know, we've become monotheistic with gods. So I 3D printed, and that's what you're seeing here, about 50 or 60 goddesses. But it wasn't enough just to make the models. The idea was, well, what would happen if you had 50 or 60 goddesses, you know, together? Well, they'd go to a bar. They'd go to the Great Goddess Bar and Grill, which is what's here, and they'd share some drinks and their experiences as goddesses. So that's my idea of, you can have objects, but the objects in and of themselves aren't worthwhile unless you could use them to tell a story. So here they are, balancing a couple of brews and drinking and eating and sharing goddess stories. So to me, this is the fun and the value of miniatures, is that if I can evoke people to think of stories when they look at this stuff, then I've done my job. So some of the stories already exist. So this is a greenhouse from Harry Potter. So the story itself exists, but to take the story and make it concrete. So we only have the Harry Potter story in books and movies, and I've made Harry Potter concrete by sponsoring Harry Potter events. So we all act out. And this is another version of that, which is, you make, in this case, Professor Sprout's greenhouse, you make it concrete. And then people can go in and imagine themselves in the scene, or imagine stories that take place as they're watching. So that's my interest in miniatures. Oh, that's the saw again. So I do dioramas. I do assemblages. And I did a bunch of peep shows, and I like the idea of peep shows as a way of sort of peeking into alternative worlds. So this isn't a world any of us live in. This is a creepy, mossy guy looking at a bunch of children in a greenhouse. I don't know what the story is. So they're cigar boxes. So you're looking through this hole, and then this is the view that you see with some very interesting lighting. So to me, the peep shows are in some ways the essence of this experience. Is like you're secretly looking into a world that is not your world, but that you can imagine a story going on. This is another peep show. This just shows you how the box is constructed. And it's a series of women sort of confronting the hand of some groper or somebody who did something to them. My favorite one, which is the creepiest one, is a little tiny peep show called He Only Shot Me Once, So I Stayed. And it's a woman's body on, you know, cheapo plastic miniatures. I mean, really this is a little tiny thing. And you could make miniatures help tell a story no matter the quality of the miniatures. That's my sort of approach that a lot of people maybe don't like. So I love beautiful miniatures, but I also love storytelling. And I'm not very good at sort of really fine quality miniatures, so I emphasize the story instead.
Hey, Louise, I would love to know if there are any folks who are watching this that can relate, that do, when they work with their own miniatures, do they tell stories like this? Do they incorporate stories like this?
Yeah.
And I guess my question would be, you know, do we all tell stories in our own way? You know, I mean, we all interact with miniatures somehow.
Right.
And I guess my argument would be, I don't think you cannot not tell a story, even if you don't do anything but have a chair in a box.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying? Do
Right.
you agree?
Absolutely. So so why is that chair in the box? Why is it all by itself?
Right.
Why, you know, is there evidence somebody just left the box? I mean, and so that's what we do. And even one object, or it works better with 2 objects or 3 objects. You know, what is the relationship between these things? And it doesn't have to be fancy. You
Right.
could do miniatures without building these elaborate sets like the rest of us do. You could make, well, here's an example. I was really mad when artist Anna Mendieta was murdered by her husband, Carl Andre. This is years ago. And I finally got around, many, many years later, I did this year, of doing an image of her husband throwing her out a window. And this is the image I made. And it's just a body. Well, you don't know what the body is, but if you know Anna Mendieta, it's based on one of her artworks. And it's a window. And there's a huge story behind this. And that's the stuff that I'm most interested in. Oh, I have another one. So this is one that was in a show. So she built a house with 2 front doors, and this is from the Kavanaugh hearings when the woman accusing him of abusing her as a teenager said she had to build 2 front doors into her house so she always had an escape. And this just knocked me out. And so I built it. And so you could know the story behind it. You could not know the story behind it, but you can't ignore it because it is out of the ordinary.
Right.
All right. So that's, Darren, if you have questions, you could keep asking. I'm just going to keep going.
No, keep going.
Okay. So I also do this with this series of utterly bizarre miniature photographs. So I just found out I have 20,000 of these. So I've been going on the beach here, and these are actually taken around the world, but I go on the beach every day, which is nice with miniatures because there's nothing around it. You can get it a nice and clean background. And for years I've been doing this, and I now have 20,000 of these. And I play with light, and I play with things I find on the beach, and shadows especially. So, and I think they evoke stories even better than the dioramas, because you look at this woman and she looks like she's carrying her luggage and she's leaving one of the houses on the beach. What's the story here? You know, and the story will come from you. It's not the story is not embedded in the image. There's a story there, and you can tease it out by talking about it, talking to somebody else about it. Sometimes I do processing on the images, not always. And then to me, that makes it even in some ways more mysterious, and the story is a little less straightforward when you do that.
So Louise, what comes first when you're creating a universe? Does the idea come first, or do you have the objects first, or like what's the process of creating this universe? So
when I'm working I like to do dioramas of movie scenes. And I'm working on a bunch now from old black and white movies from the 1960s. So in that case, the story exists before I work on it, but I take a little tiny segment of a bigger story and focus people's attention on it. So that in that case, the story exists first. But mostly it comes from material that I have. So I have hundreds of these little figures that I take out to the beach or on our trips, and I just put them places and photograph them and this is why there's 20,000 photographs in a variety of situations. So for example, I didn't have this as a story pre-made. There was a machine a couple summers ago that was parked on the beach, and it had this rusty metal background. And every time I put miniatures in front of it, it cast shadows.
Yep.
And so I have a whole bunch of these shadow stories. And depending on, obviously, where you put the people, you have a different story. So here's two women, and one woman looks very sad, and there's a man off to the side. I mean, what's the story here? That's, to me, the valuable part.
Right.
And so to answer your question, Darren, I usually except when I'm doing things based on the movies or on books, I usually let the materials and the situation around me dictate what I do.
Okay. Let me just check in on the chat box, guys. If you have any questions, let me know, or let Louise know, or if you have any thoughts and comments, let us know. I do have a comment. I guess it's a question. How do you feel? That's a nice comment. So inspired, Allison said. How do you feel when you create a miniature with a story that others might not agree with? I guess.
Well, especially I'm doing a series on how women are murdered, for example, and how women are abused. So for a lot of people, we shouldn't use miniatures that way, right? We should use miniatures to make happy and joyful and pretty and fun things. And I don't agree, because to me, miniatures are a medium. They're not sacred in the sense of you can only do one thing with them. So that's a great question, because I always do things people don't agree with. Wait till you see the protest stuff that I'm about to show you. So, you know, I let the stuff sort of suggest. I don't go out with an idea ahead of time. I find things on the beach, or I find beautiful shadows. Yesterday I found a dead fish on the beach. You know, I have so many dead fish pictures now. They're wonderful.
Right.
But the thing that is most public of my work right now is this series of miniature protests, which are in my front yard. And I started this, I believe, 3 years ago. And all the figures are 3D printed, and they're about that big, about 5 inches high. They're all women. And I guess I started it as honoring the Women's March several years ago. And then I made all these little protest signs that are replicas of real protest signs. And so this is in my front yard. It gets a lot of attention because hundreds of people walk by my yard every day.
That is so pretty. That's pretty awesome. I want to just make sure we're going to get the last of the questions before we have to move on. I
only have 2 pictures to do.
What's that?
Go ahead while I show.
Yeah, no, so we just actually have a comment about from an attendee saying that she loves creating something that's ambiguous, that you can see alternative worldviews.
Yes.
That's kind of cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, so ambiguous is an absolutely key term, because you are creating a world that is undefined and has a lot of possibilities. So this was a display, same garden. It was a Area 51 display, and they were coming to take Donald Trump away. Not ambiguous, but it was fun. And these are some more people in the protests. I mean, Sigmund Freud in the background, and the Wolfman, who I absolutely adore, saying none of this is normal. And finally, my last one. This was 2 years ago. Yeah. And people stop at my garden and they talk about the displays, which is the whole purpose of it. And so if you can get people to talk about your miniatures and say something about it other than, as I told my husband today, don't tell me it's cute, right? I don't want to know it's cute. I want to know what story it evokes for you. And that's my goal as a miniature.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's great.
You know, one thing I want to point out about this is that when you get into politics, you leave the world of ambiguity, right? But what you've done here is they're funny, and they're like political cartoons, right?
Yeah.
Come to life as a miniature. Yeah. And that, I think, allows people to enter it more than just the sign in the front yard. There's more about like, well, why are these here? Why the size? And then, you know, even with this here, it reminds me of a political cartoon. It's not as straightforward as just a sign in the front yard.
Yeah, and that was the whole point with the aliens too, because you can't see it, but there's a UFO there, and there's aliens all over. There are like hundreds of aliens all over the place. Right. So yeah, to make it a little bit humorous, when you're doing something political opens up the possibility for conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to unshare my screen.
That's awesome. Thank you, Louise. That was awesome.
Fun.
Thomas, you're going to set up your screen and take us through escapism.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about escapism in miniatures, and there's going to be a lot of overlap with what Louise just talked to you about, because she's talking about alternative worlds, and that's what I spend most of my time building. I want to start with something that I probably saw once a week growing up. My mother is out here as an attendee, so she can.
Yay. Hi, Mom.
So we had HBO from a very young age, and this is the opening credits. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but for years, this is what any movie you watch on HBO, they all began this way. I'm just going to play this out.
Yes.
So we have the family there. That's clearly like a green screen because we've just moved now into a miniature set.
I remember that.
Yes, I do too.
Yes.
And so I would stare at this and I knew it was a miniature. And I was so enthralled with this, knowing that somebody made that. Now, we think of escapism and we think of, what better way than entertainment in the world of movies, right? We would do this all now digitally, but when you're making miniatures, there's this two types of wonder as far as I'm concerned. And one is, well, they made this world and that's amazing, but then there's also the amazement that somebody actually physically made it, right? Which we don't get as much anymore from miniature work. But what I want to focus on here with this is what allows us to enter the world, to escape into it. And one of the things that I'm really focused on in terms of allowing people to kind of get into this world is the details. And I think that's one way that miniatures can help tell those stories, because I'm really interested in telling stories too, just like Louise is. But I see what allows for escapism to enter this world as being real is are the details. So I want to show you just a couple, and watch for the bus. Here comes the bus, right? So that bus makes you feel like, okay, this is a real city, right? This is not just a set, something's moving. The next thing I want to point out is right here. So let's take a look at these brownstones here.
Oh, yes.
Some of the windows are lit.
Yeah.
Some of them are not. Let's see if we can get a better, there we go.
Yes.
Some are lit and some are not. They could all be lit. They could all be dark. But the model makers chose reality, right? They chose to mimic the way life is. So those kind of details allow us to enter a little bit more into the story. If we think about, if you've ever seen a movie where it's very rare, but I have seen where the boom operator dips the boom mic into the top of the frame, and you're like, oh my goodness, how do they miss that? You're suddenly not watching a movie anymore, right? Or if you saw there's a famous thing that happened, I think it was last year with Game of Thrones, where someone left a Starbucks cup on a table, and then they had to quickly rush in and digitally airbrush it out. But everybody had seen it. It destroys the illusion, right? So I think about those details a lot, and I'll show you some of my work. I think about those details a lot as a way, sometimes when I talk about my work, I make very surreal, sort of strange, fantastical scenes. And I kind of think of them as, it's storytelling, they're fiction, they're basically a big lie, right? I want you to come along with me. I'm going to tell you a story, and the story is not going to be real at all. No one, hopefully, has encountered a house like this. But in order for me to do this, I may have to tell you lots and lots of little lies along the way, right? To help you believe the big one. So if we look in here, we know this is actually a house because there's a garden hose right here and a trash can, and that's what people do, right? We know this is a child's room because there's a toy ball there and a teddy bear in the crib. And, oh, a basement, I have a broom in my basement, right? So this feels real to me. It's this way of kind of getting you to come along and enter this world. And that's where kind of the escapism that I'm talking about comes from. A few other examples that I'll show. And kind of mesh with what Louise was talking about, clues in storytelling, right? So there's a lot of ambiguity in the work that I do. People will often try to pin me down and say, but what happened to this house? And my answer is invariably, I don't know. And I really don't care to know. I would really prefer that you enter and spend the time and get into it and think about it yourself. But as I said, to get people to come along with this, I want you to kind of come in and look at these details. And if you can start to believe this, you can escape with me. So if we see here, there's clothing on the edge of a chair here. And I've tried to do those things to bring that story through. So my topic was going to be escapism and kind of basically entering this world, which is a lot of what Louise was talking about. The other thing that I've done with my work is try to push it to this place where the chaos of it is outpacing reality, right? So meaning, a work like this, if you are under stress or you're being challenged by the world around you, if you're spending hundreds of hours making something like this, your life doesn't seem that bad, right? It's like, you've got to back out and look at what these characters are going through. Wow. And that often will bring you, it brings me some solace. And I'm maybe the only one, but the people in these works are typically under a lot of duress. If I go into a piece like this, where the house has been flipped, you see this couple here, and he's reaching up for the door. I don't have an explanation of what's happening here, but one thing that I've done a lot in my earlier work is that they are almost all under a dome or under a vitrine. So what that does to me, it feels like I closed off this world, right? So I feel like that any of the chaos and any of the disaster in there has now been pushed down and kept in here. It's in there and my world is out here. So that kind of separation, I think, is a lot of what's happening in my world. And one example here, this is a piece called Firing for Effect. And this is a very large, about a 44-inch sphere that's bolted together, these two sides, and inside is another sphere. This sort of happy globe hanging over lifted out of this disaster. And this is their neighborhood. It's been carved out. But they exist in their little world and we exist in ours. And I'm happy that these works get contained and pushed in here. When I think about escapism, anybody who makes miniatures themselves or is an admirer of miniatures, typically, that when you are up close with it, the rest of the world really melts away. That's right. And that's because to get, this piece here, this man on the ladder, if we get up to this level, I actually cannot see this with my naked eye. It wouldn't look like this. I can't get close enough. This is a photograph in the macro lens. But in order to look at a piece like this and to get this close, you must have this really intimate experience with it. And the other things around you, they'd go out of focus because your eyes are focused here. And that, I think that really says a lot about miniatures, and that's why it's why I assume why Louise does what she does, I do what I do. there are people that want to tell stories. There are people who just really love the stress relief of diving into this world and things sort of melting away. That's why people make doll houses and they lock themselves in the basement to make model train sets. And they're just really focused on this world because they're in control of this world. I talk a lot about children in miniatures, and they show up a lot in my work. But importantly, I think about the connection of children playing with toys. So playing with dolls and action figures and making these little worlds. I often think about how children are really some of the most powerless people in our society, right? Everybody tells them what to do constantly. And it's a way of making the world the way they want it to be, or reflecting the world as they see it. And that's probably why toys and this type of play is so important for children, because they're exploring the world around them and they're like, well, what if it was like this? What if it was like this? And I feel like one of the things that I do is to continue to play and to keep conjuring these sort of what if scenarios. You know, a piece like this, where this is the same house repeated, the last one is sunk down into the earth while the other ones hover above. It's something probably a child might do. But to me, it is this way of kind of entering this imaginative space and being able to escape from one world into the other one.
Yeah.
One of the last things I want to talk a little bit about details, and as you know, figures kind of facing each other. Louise had pointed out when you were talking about the shadow picture, there were two women talking and a man there. There was a mentor of mine when I first became an artist. I was a painter, and he was a painter as well. And he had little architectural figures, like the silver lead ones that are used. They're very, very simple. And he had been putting them on the tops of his paintings, and he would drill little holes, and he would put, you know, a couple here and one here, and you could spin them on the pins, and they were in the painting was the main event, but there was this tiny scene at the top, and it made such an impact on me as a young artist. And he had said, you know, look what happens when she faces him and not him, or look when they are both looking at this person. And, you know, and I realized how simple it was when these people look at each other or they don't. When someone, I'll find another example here, is, you know, in this piece here, there's this massive train here that is going down into the foundation of a house. And a lot of times the only person who's ever seems to recognize what's going on is the child in some of these. And, you know, he looks up and he sees this.
Yeah.
You know, the father's just striding home with groceries and the wife is pushing a stroller, and they are totally oblivious to what's happening here. But one person knows. So I'm interested in that view as well, in sort of seeing through their eyes, and that allows you to enter that world and sort of escape into it. But I've been rambling on, so let me pause and
no, I love what you said about the details. You said early on about how it's the details, and I totally agree with that. And I actually think that miniatures take you away. They're a form of escape, but the more detail you get, the more you escape. And that's why, for me, I think the more detailed the miniature, the more I'm amazed by it, because not only is it amazing work, but I'm spending time thinking about it. I'm spending more time thinking about it. And the more time I spend on it, the less time I'm thinking about the real world. So I love that. And I love the detail in your work. It's just amazing.
Although I would slightly argue with you, because I think once you escape into a miniature world, if that's how you want to think about it, it's also commenting on the world that you just left. That is, there never is an escape from what you left behind. I mean, these works are just so stunning, but they are saying something about not just the artwork itself, but about the stories we tell or the lives we live outside. And I love the fact that your kids are the ones who notice.
Yeah.
You know, kids can connect this imaginative world with the mundane world we all have to live every day. So yeah, that's a wonderful connection.
You know, I don't know if we want to do an open part of the conversation later or talk about it now, but Louise, this interesting to me when you shared the that piece, He Only Shot Me Once.
Yeah.
So simple, and it's so different than like the Rear Window scene, which is just to a T, like down to this kind of hyper detail.
Yeah.
So I would like to know about how you handle like the difference in details. I think you said you were just trying to tell stories with very few elements. Is that how you arrived at that piece?
No, not necessarily. The Rear Window, I was trying to have people look at it and think it was real.
Okay.
And very much like your work, to me is the same thing. People look at it and go, yeah, that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so but the Rear Window had a referent that if I wasn't honest in terms of evoking that referent, then people wouldn't get it. Okay.
Right.
So to me, a story that pre-exists my making a miniature about it limits what I can do.
I see.
Yeah, but the peep show, and I play with the whole idea of peep show is showing, you know, obscene things or whatever. Those have to be simpler because you're looking through a tiny hole at an alternative world and you're only showing a little tiny slice of it. And so I love making those really, really simple and, you know, not filling in all the gaps like you can't, like you have to when you are trying to evoke something that already exists.
Sure. Yeah, the Rear Window piece wouldn't work obviously if you went halfway on that.
Right.
It's like that's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, the ambiguity that you leave in the other pieces, I think, allows people to to enter them.
Yeah, and the same with yours, like even the one that's up there now with the train, if you filled in all the details around that, it's too much, right? Yeah. You want this, I love the idea of what if. That's really what guides a lot of my work. Like, what if, this happened? What if, this woman was killed in this room and the only thing you could see was her body and the gun? What's the story there? And I love the train one because you don't need everything else around it. You only need that to set the story in motion, whatever the story is for you. So,
that's awesome. Do we have any questions from the attendees? Anybody have any questions or comments before we move on to the last of our topics? Okay, I'm gonna go and wait. Let me just check the Q&A. It's more of a comment that Nicole is. No, actually, it's a question. Just wondering, how do you find your work and artistic practice changing in these past months during this pandemic, this time of violence, unrest, and uncertainty? So yeah, that's a great question. How has your work changed, or your thinking changed in what you're doing? This is a great question.
Okay. Thomas, you want to go first, or?
No.
Okay. I actually, I would be working more on the violence against women images, but I have moved slightly away from miniatures, and I'm working with old photographs, old cabinet card photographs. Darren, you've seen some of these. I think I showed them last time. And I'm combining these images of, very staid studio photographs with miniatures. So sometimes I paste miniatures that people are holding miniatures, and I'm rethinking their stories because they're dead stories. They're dead people and they're dead stories. They're all very stilted. So I give them all sorts of crazy things to imagine another world that they could be living in. So that's how I've done 100 of those already. And that's how I'm addressing Nicole's question, which is I'm just making lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff that I never did before. So, you know, I have the protest guys out there. Yeah, that's fun. And I talk to the people. But this is, I really need to make stuff with my hands. And that's.
Got it. Thomas?
You know, I have been doing, I did a commission for a research group called the American Archaeology Society. So I worked on that for a while. And that was helpful. I also worked on the title sequence for a TV show that should be coming out soon.
Nice.
That allowed me to kind of dive into that world for a while. And that was a nice project because it was not my world. I could just focus on it and make it as detailed as possible and not have to think.
Awesome.
Can you tell us a little about the archaeology project? Come on, you can't just throw out the title and not tell us.
So the American Archaeology Society is they study the arcs, which are I'm sure that everybody is familiar with the arcs. They're the time capsules that have been coming back to the past from the future. They commissioned me to make a series of models. So I made these models based on the evidence that and created these. So this is my latest series. I did it for them, and you can see it at the at their website. There's a full there's a video about the process if you're interested in watching, you know, seeing me interviewed in the studio and seeing me work. There's a little bit there, and then these models as well. So that was kind of one way of processing, you know, everything that's going on, and this just launched recently. So
beautiful, awesome, thank you. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see that?
We can.
Yes.
So, okay, let's hope it even works because it didn't before. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I'm calling miniatures as a pop culture phenomenon, because I feel like over the last few years, this is sort of what I'm seeing in terms of the miniatures world, or at least the more traditional miniatures world that most people are seeing, whether that means dollhouse or miniatures, furniture, etc. And I'm going to take you through where I'm seeing those things and where, you know, where they're coming from. And I think the first place that I'm seeing it is in things like television commercials and film and movies. Here you see a commercial using miniatures to sell Smirnoff's vodka. This is, you know, this is an ad for Gucci. There's an amazing miniaturist. Her name is, I think it's Aaliyah. I'm so bad with names, but they commissioned her to create this little scene to help promote shoes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fashion in a second, but almost every category you can imagine is out there, is dabbling, any category you can imagine is dabbling in using miniatures as a way to sell product. And we talked a lot about how the details get you involved. And I think there's no better way than using miniatures to get folks to zoom in on a message and have them sort of get it. So, you know, this is an example of one of the food companies. I think I have one for KFC coming up, where KFC created this tiny miniature, you know, restaurant to help promote their food chains. So, you know, it just goes back to what I'm seeing is I'm actually seeing an increased use of miniatures to help sell product. And I think this is helping to sort of drive what I'm calling a phenomenon of miniatures being more entering the mainstream, more becoming in the consumer's mind. And this is an example of Zagat's. I don't know if you guys know, Zagat's is the company that helps to rate restaurants. They opened up a tiny cafe in Union Square in New York City, and they brought together chefs to create tiny foods to help sell the new Zagat's issue that was coming out that year. This was, I think, 2 years ago. I'm seeing miniatures being used to help drive awareness of furniture. That was an anthropology commercial. This is Dior using miniatures to help sell fashion. So we're seeing it everywhere. on the runways. We're seeing it to help sell food. We're seeing it to help sell commercials. This is a tiny purse. We saw a lot of miniatures in fashion in the last few years, helping to sell the message of the runway designers. That's Miss Lady Gaga there. So lots of energy around miniatures in film, in fashion, in television, even in media and magazines. This is House Beautiful. They did a whole series of inviting interior decorators to come in and decorate one house each week for 11 weeks. To help drive House Beautiful's message. This is an example of using miniatures in a series game show in the UK, which is actually coming here to the United States, called Small Fortune. And then finally, this is a documentary that was created last year that's now on air in Canada, which is a documentary around miniatures. So lots of energy in the last few years around the topic of miniatures. That I'm seeing. In another way that I'm seeing miniatures be helping.
Hey guys, today we're going to be making another aquarium.
It's social media and the YouTubers are helping to promote awareness of miniatures and how to make miniatures. There are a couple of them out there who are really, really capturing quite a substantial audience of hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million subscribers with hundreds of thousands of views on how to make miniatures. And these are essentially young miniaturists who are out there consistently promoting and showcasing miniatures, how to make them, how to find materials, how to actually make them. And so this is another way over the past few years that I'm seeing a growth of interest that's helping drive awareness around miniatures. So tutorials and how-tos. Also, I'm recognizing that there's a new face to miniaturists. They're younger. I'm not saying all of them, but the ones that are sort of raising awareness and bringing attention to miniatures, they're hip. You know, they're not your grandmother's miniaturists. They're creating things that are outside the box. They're pushing the envelope on what's acceptable to make in miniature. This is Amanda Kelly. She does amazing work creating scenes like this in miniature. They're also younger in some respects, and they are incorporating artistic skills that we've really never seen before. This is Kevin Delante. He makes miniature scenes, and you know, using graffiti and grit from the city, from cityscapes. So these are some of the folks that are really helping to build awareness around these tiny treasures that we love so much. There are also this emergence of the influencer in the miniatures world. Folks like Kate Unver from the Daily Mini, who has 200,000 followers, and she posts every day, not only promoting the miniaturists, but telling their stories and also showcasing their work. Sugar Charm Shop, she's a tutorial, a YouTuber who creates tutorials. I think I shared a little bit about her work a bit ago, but not only is she showing you what she makes, but she's also teaching you how she makes them, showing you how she makes them. And then this is a little bit of more of a modern twist. Jessica Clow Mini, she's really helping to bring a modern contemporary approach to the miniatures world by showcasing not your traditional Victorian miniatures. So they're much more contemporary, they're bright, they're cheerful. They're definitely helping to bring miniatures to a whole new place. So the emergence of the miniaturists is something I'm seeing that is helping to drive this whole idea about pop culture phenomenons. And then TikTok. If you're not on TikTok, this is a new, obviously it's an emerging platform. Miniaturists are just finding it now and helping to really create new ways of promoting not only their work, but the miniatures world in new, entertaining ways. So using music, using really, really great visuals to help spread the news about miniatures, help describe them, help tell the story, and bring new folks in. And it's really exciting to see. What I'm gonna have to do is take 1 second because my battery is dying. So hang out and talk amongst yourself. Come on. Nope.
Louise, have you ever done any work with film? With anyone filming your work?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually had a guy come from Australia. This was the strangest thing. And because he wanted to do a movie, and I think he was doing a movie, but anyway, he saw the Rear Window diorama, and he wanted to come and photograph it because it was the most realistic scene of Greenwich Village in that time period.
Sure.
And it's not real, you know,
Right.
it was built in a stage set. And then I'm in the movie, the documentary Miniaturists.
Okay.
And that's a wonderful documentary that everybody should watch. I mean, I'm the most sort of mundane person in it. The things that they included in that that documentary are just amazing. And like a really wide range of everything from the guy who does things on the tip of a pencil to people who are doing political miniatures outside and, you know, wide scale protests. It's brilliant. It's really, really good. Darren, we're talking about the documentary Miniatures.
I don't know why my power is not working.
Are you back?
Like I have no electric. It's so weird. And I have like 4 minutes. I have like 4 minutes on this. But okay, let's do one more thing. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat box.
Somebody said their dollhouse was used at a bank for their mortgage business. That's pretty funny.
I love it.
Yeah. I'm doing a model of a building from the 1876 World's Fair, which I study. And one of those buildings came to this town that I live in and actually came right onto the property that we live on now. So I know it's kind of creepy. So I'm building a model of it. It was the Kansas Colorado building from the World's Fair. Mm-hmm. And it was taken apart and brought here and rebuilt as a hotel in 1876. And, you know, eventually burned down. None of that exists anymore. But I'm making a model of it. So talk about time travel. I mean,
yeah, sure.
That's a real cool element of it. So, but, you know, in terms of, like my work has never been filmed in a movie, like used as a movie set. Has yours, Thomas?
You know, the first time I've done work that has been used in still photography.
Yeah.
But for the project that I just wrapped up over the summer for the opening sequence for a TV show, that was the first time I'd ever done that. And it was an interesting challenge. I mean, I know there are miniaturists, Laurie Nix and Kathleen Gerber, who do amazing work. They do a lot of TV and advertising, so they're used to it. I was not, but it presents a challenge, you know, because you're thinking about lighting and camera movement as part of the story that's being told, and it was a really fun challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So just to sort of finish this up, I wanted to share a couple of things, other reasons why I think this is that miniatures are sort of becoming more of a pop culture phenomenon. It's hitting the celebrity sort of range more than I've seen before. This is Olivia Wilde. she is a known miniatures enthusiast. She has millions of followers, and she often, you know, promotes on her social media channels that she loves miniatures. She shows pictures of miniatures. And this is an example of how they know she loves miniatures, and they gave her a gift when she did her directorial debut last year for a film that she did. So we're seeing a lot of energy around miniatures, and I see it continuing. And there's a couple of ways I see that. Anecdotally, you know, I'm hearing that sales of miniatures are on the rise. We heard good news this week that I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Guild School, but the Guild School is an annual event that brings hundreds of people together to learn how to make miniatures. And you know, they are seeing their highest numbers ever in terms of students. So those are good signs. And I think one of the biggest signs that miniatures is sort of moving more into the mainstream than ever before is I think if you ask a young person what is a miniature, or if you tell a young person that you're into miniatures, you know, in the past you would have heard, oh, what is that? Or, you know, oh, you make dolls or doll houses, and that's fine too, but they barely know what you're talking about. But more and more I'm hearing, oh, you're into miniatures? Me too. There's no questions about what it is. They know what miniatures are. The younger folks know what miniatures are. And I think that is what's helping it really become something more than it's ever been before.
Yeah,
So,
and that's due to
yeah.
social media. I mean, if you go on anything, Pinterest or
Yeah.
you know, even Twitter, I'm on Twitter and I'm always putting miniatures up, and other people are doing it as well. And so it's a way that people